Hey, welcome to 52 Weeks Live. I'm sorry I'm a little late. I'm also going to have to close the door. Hold on. Sorry, my husband's conference call was loud. Okay, so today we with sorry about my hair, the amazing Newell Turner, who's connecting. You too? I'm like, the time kind of crept up on me. I had just enough time to slather on the maximum amount of lipstick. How are you, Newell?
I'm good. How are you, Alexa?
I am so happy to see your beautiful face.
Likewise. It's been too long. I haven't seen you in months, I don't think.
Well, I mean, makes sense, right?
It does. Hang on. I'm just getting this adjusted. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you, but you are sort of low on this screen. Perfect. Because, all those comments float up and then I don't get to see your beautiful face, those baby blue eyes.
You look great.
Thank you. A little heavy-handed with the blush today, but as I said, it's a bit of a rush. And now there's a vacuum cleaner going on in the background. It's just that kind of day.
Well, thank you for inviting me to join you today.
Yeah, where are you? Where am I speaking? Are you in the Catskills?
I'm in the Catskills at my house in Bovina Center, and I've basically pretty much been here for the whole quarantine period.
Good.
Since last year.
Yeah.
Or earlier this year.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear that. I think my family and I might get in the car tomorrow afternoon and go away for a couple of weeks. I'm getting a little stressed out by the positivity numbers. But what I really want to talk about, and that will make me feel happy, is to hear about the renovations you're doing, the carpet collections you're doing, all that stuff. But I first want to hear how you got started in the field.
How I got started in the field. Well, I think I had said to you in the questionnaire that you sent out, I grew up with parents that cared about interior design. And they had
I love the story of you and the decorator.
They had a lot of interior designer friends who various ones helped them do different rooms in their house. And when I was about 14, we had moved into my great-grandmother's house, and my parents let me work with their decorator to do my room.
Yeah.
And basically, my big memory is going to Jim's office, which was at his home in Jackson, Mississippi, and looking through the wallpaper books.
Yeah.
Now, I know he had them very planned out. He probably figured out
he was
wallpaper.
Wise man. If you're meeting with a child, you need to have cleared it with the parent first, what's up for grabs, and then.
Right. Well, my parents were really letting me do what I wanted to do, and they trusted him. But I remember just the patterns and that wallpaper smell as you go through the books. And so I did it, and we picked this stripe. It was a multi-width, multicolored stripe. This was the early 70s. So it was...
Yes, I recall rust shag being part of the equation.
Yeah, it was rust, navy, and then little stripes of lime green and orange and cream and baby blue even. It sounds crazy, but it was quite good, and it actually still exists. It's still in place. It's held up incredibly over all these years. And so basically it was that old decorator trick of everything in the same pattern.
Yeah.
So the headboard, the curtains, the valance, everything was in that stripe, and then the ceiling, the wallpaper had done it like a tin effect. So it was great.
So fabulous.
That was
you were
very
14?
influential. That was 14, yeah.
Yeah, that's
and
a
that
call
was very influential. But I had a passion for magazines that go back to my family's pharmacy. A cousin had a pharmacy in our small town, and my best friend's father was a pharmacist, and we would go and get behind the magazine racks and pull the magazines over and read them because, small town Mississippi, there wasn't a lot to do. And I had a passion for magazines that go back to as long as I can remember. I remember having a subscription.
It's also interesting hearing you say that you love the smell of the wallpaper. I wonder if there's like some sort of tactile experience between you and paper.
Could be.
You know, like whether it's a magazine or.
But definitely pattern. I
Yeah.
love pattern. You know, a lot of people are afraid of pattern, but I think pattern has the ability to create such a narrative in a room
Yeah.
that it's you know, nothing to be afraid of, you know. And today, the way people layer patterns, I mean, once you kind of start down the narrative, as I call it, in
Mm-hmm.
decorating, you can just kind of layer and layer, and it just creates a wonderful texture and depth and story. So I love pattern. I do love
Yeah.
pattern.
I feel like in the past few years, as our industry has embraced pattern again and has gone like forward, I it has suddenly made me realize the way you said that it's a narrative and it's a story, that all of those years when I've listened to actors or journalists or people say, oh, you know, we're bringing this story and just thank you for letting us tell our stories. I find the penny finally dropped, because I was like, oh yeah, it's all about story. And I think I'd just been seeing it as design for so long that I hadn't embraced that total point.
Narrative,
Which,
yeah.
of course, as a great writer, as you are, of course.
Well, you know, I wanted to be an architect, but my family have long, many generational ties to the University of Mississippi.
Yeah, great.
And my grandfather put a kibosh on it. He said, there's no architecture program there, pick something else. So I ended up in journalism. And, you know, it's sort of funny how it came back around, because I went into journalism, but then my career came right back to design and
Mm-hmm.
architecture through journalism. So it's, you know, it's something that's been in my DNA and blood for a long time, and it's been a passion. It continues to be a real passion. I think things are getting really exciting again with interior design.
I do too.
Um, Ironically, and you know, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we all know that people are paying more attention to their environment. You know, you're there more,
Yeah.
so you're seeing more and paying attention to it. And I don't know. I think it's an exciting time for interior design, and I am also a huge
And for the printed word, whether it's
huh?
on a screen, and for the printed word, for looking,
And
reading, whether it's on a screen or not. Like we're all reading. Well, back to what you said in the questionnaire. For you, it's a forever position.
well, you know, you had my former colleague Michael Boudreau on
Mm-hmm.
your series, and I was listening to that, and you know, he was saying so many things that I would echo. But I think books are so important and exciting right now, because there's so, you know, there are a lot of books out there, but there's some really good books being done.
Yeah.
I'm on a Mexican kick right now,
So
so
yeah, we did not. I did not mention that in. It's in your questionnaire, but I did not mention it in the post that you have just bought a wonderful courtyard house in Merida, and you've been on the hunt for that house for years.
I've been looking for about 5 years, and we closed on the house 2 years ago. But as a lot of people will know, ownership and title are really complicated in Mexico. So like
Oh,
everybody in a family that's selling a house has to sign off on the selling of the house. So there could be 14 siblings. And you know, when you have 14 siblings, sometimes one goes missing. You know, they don't know where he went or where she went.
hey,
And until everybody signs off on it, you can't fully own the property. So it
that
took a
sucks.
while. We went through some houses that we fell in love with that we didn't get, but then we ended up with this center courtyard house that I'm really excited about. I've spent the past year working with architects down there on the design.
Well, and
And
I remember you were telling me 5 years ago that it was all about the central courtyard for you. That was the house you wanted, and that you were not going to settle for anything less.
well, you know, Alexa, I'm an Anglophile. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I love an English room. Like, it sounds crazy, but that just gets, I can look at an English room and study it for hours, you know,
Yeah.
especially classical rooms. But I also really love the design influences that came out of Persia, through Greece and Rome, and worked their way through
Mm-hmm.
Spain and into the New World in Latin America, primarily things like courtyard houses, I always had a dream of having a courtyard house. So
I have that. I shared this with you.
yeah, it's just wonderful. And on one end of the house, it's a rectangular courtyard house.
Mm-hmm.
And on one end is the dining room. And the dining room is basically a two-sided open pavilion. So it's this wonderful indoor-outdoor house
Uh-huh.
that I think it's going to be pretty magical when we finish it. I'm in the process.
I'm a little envious, but I'm happy for you.
Thank you. I can't wait. I can't wait. So that's my plan, is to spend part of the year here and part of the year in Mexico, because I've also fallen in love with Mexico. And this goes back to years ago when I did some stories for Metropolitan Home. There's so much interesting design and culture in Mexico that the average American has no idea what's there. And it's starting to really explode in Mexico City in particular, and people are
I love Mexico City.
paying attention to what's happening there.
And Merida's also like an artist colony at this point, right?
It is. It is. There are a lot of fine artists that have studio spaces there from the States and Europe and even the Caribbean. It's funny. A lot of Cubans and Puerto Ricans have studio spaces in Merida. So,
and our dear friend Laura Carrar.
And our dear friend Laura Carrar and Richard, who are doing a spectacular renovation on a hacienda just outside of the city.
You mean their own or for somebody else?
Their own.
I mean their own. If anybody watching this, go to Laura Carrar and Richard Fraser's Instagram feed. This house is it's a hero house.
It's magical, and they've had it for a while. They built a pool house that they lived in for the last few years. Mm-hmm. And now they are moving forward pretty quickly. In fact, Laura just posted some pictures.
Wasn't it like a convent or something, or does it just look that way?
It has Moorish arches across the front, so it's that kind of feeling. It's a beautiful long house. It's basically one room deep, so you can imagine the great light that gets.
Yeah.
And the loggia on the front is, the width of a normal room, so it's pretty spectacular. The property is gorgeous too.
So when do you think you're gonna? I mean, obviously you're gonna enjoy the process.
I intend to enjoy the process. I'm actually, there's a part of a book I'm working on is going to come out of it.
Good.
So I've got a book in the works. I've got 2 books in the works, actually, that I...
Can you tell us what they are, or do you have to be a little demure?
I have to be a little discreet right now, but I can definitely say it involves Mexico and the decorative arts, and in the context of a gringo eye, from the context of a gringo eye. And that's another thing that I've gotten really interested in. I've been reading during this pandemic. I have a huge now library of Mexican design books, old and new. But there's been this great tradition of expats in Mexico that have had really big influences on the decorative arts, both from the United States and from Europe, going back to World War II, that have come in and really found and highlighted and developed various artistic traditions that Mexico is so rich in.
Sure.
I mean, the decorative arts there. I mean, the craft tradition is incredible. Pretty much.
And
everything.
in this moment where we are being so much more aware of diversity and the genius of different cultures, certainly you could. I mean, yeah, Mexico, it's not that nobody is aware of it. Everybody's aware of it, but,
well, it's
rich
our
tradition.
Neighbor, but, when you start diving into it, there's been a long tradition of cultural exchange between Mexico and California in particular. Mm-hmm. But Texas, all of those states along the border, Mexican design, Spanish design has really, there's
Portuguese,
a much more close relationship than you realize. And so I'm fascinated by that. And so it's been my passion. It's kind of become my obsession these days, between that and the summers here in Bovina in the Catskills are magnificent. And I love my little house up here. but I'm looking forward to having a house where people can come visit and stay for a while.
Yeah, me too. I'm looking forward to that.
3 guest rooms in this house, so it's going to be a very open door policy. I can't wait to have people come down.
So at the same time as you're doing this renovation, you're also renovating in the Catskills.
Renovating where?
In the Catskills.
I am. You know, my partner is in real estate. And when things with my career started changing and we decided to spend more time up here, we started doing this little thing, buying houses in foreclosure, really inexpensive, and fixing them up and flipping them. And not going crazy with it because we're not trying to like gouge the market.
Oh, sure.
But we, we're not doing it for, the goodness of it. We are trying to make money at it.
Yeah.
But we're getting houses out of foreclosure, making them mortgageable, and really making them up to date with appliances and electrical and plumbing and all of that, and putting them back on the market at a great price for people that...
And you're a person with this huge wealth of knowledge about houses and how they should look. Yeah. And you're not letting some jackass, if I may, buy it, strip it, make it the worst thing ever, and then put it back into the universe.
Well, Alexa, we typically buy the ugliest house on the block, and then we try to do things that make it fit in and feel more part of the community.
The fabric.
The street it's on. One of the house that we are just selling right now is in Stamford, New York, and it's on a dead-end street called West Main that is lined with beautiful Victorian houses. And this is truly the ugly duckling on the block. It was the prefab house from 1961.
Yeah.
So we've done things to it that kind of make it step back a little bit visually. But
like a moat and a castle wall. It's so great. It's at the end of a cul-de-sac with just a little moat and an enormous Roman wall.
Well, let me say, we've made all the neighbors happy there because they were like, oh, that was such a sore thumb on our block. So we curry a little favor that way locally. But, I love it up here. I think I told you, I've been trying to figure out what do I do next? I mean, these projects are fun, renovations, but they're a lot of work. I mean, we're doing a lot of work for someone that's buying these houses that we do. But I have just done something that I'm kind of excited to talk about. This is the first day I'm actually talking about it publicly, but I was hired to do a collection of rugs based on bovina. Now, that sounded crazy to me when I was asked to do it, because I was like, who's ever heard of bovina?
Are you allowed to say with whom?
Huh?
Are you allowed to say with whom?
It's with a fantastic India company called OBT. They're about 100-year-old company. They're the leader in handmade woven and loomed rugs. And they make rugs for pretty much everyone you can think of. It's usually private labels, so you don't see their label all the time.
Sure.
But they're an incredible company, 100 years old, handmade everything. And this collection, bovina is this funny little part of the Catskills that there's something magical about it. I got caught up in it when I bought here, 20 years ago. I have no idea why I bought here. I didn't know a soul when I bought the property that I'm living on. And people come here and are kind of captivated by the mountains here. I'm looking out the window, the mountains.
Will you show us out the window?
It's really dreary out there right now.
Okay, go show us out the window.
We've already had one huge snowstorm. And it's back to no snow right now, but it'll be coming in a few weeks. But anyway, it's a magical place, a magical part of the Catskills. And it was an interesting challenge, Alexa, because there are no real textile traditions here. There's one that I've sort of tapped into, and it's kind of call it one of the hearts of the collection, bed coverlets. They were typically made at home in frontier, and then they started making They started building little factories mid-1800s and manufacturing them. So there's a small part of the collection based on coverlets, geographic coverlets, and
You mean depicting geography?
geometric. Sorry,
Oh,
not
geometrics. Okay, I'm like, oh,
geometric.
interesting.
Sorry
Yeah.
about that. And then nature is a bigger part of it. I mean, that's a big part of why people come here is
Sure.
to sort of wrap yourself in nature.
So somebody's asking, is Bovina a town, an area, or a river?
Bovina is a town in the county of Delaware, which is a county that's bigger than the state of Rhode Island in New York State in the Catskills. We're in what's called the southern tier of New York. We're right in that little armpit of the state.
Delightful. I actually drove to Skinny-Atlas a month ago and drove through, it's a circuitous route up there towards Albany, and got to see a lot of like, I don't think I'd really focused on how totally gorgeous this state can be in just a single drive.
Yeah, we're like an hour west of Albany.
Yeah, beautiful.
About an hour west of Woodstock. Yeah, it's gorgeous, and it's gotten incredibly interesting. I mean, it started before the pandemic. People, weekenders, but also people, young couples starting to move up full time. And it just only accelerated this past year. So there's an incredibly interesting mix of people that are now calling this area home. And it's really bringing a lot of life to the community. So it's an exciting time here. Yeah.
So, as you were saying, as you're figuring out what you want to do with like, you've got all of the tools and all of the treasure in your toolbox from this career of yours. Let's talk about that career a little bit. Your first job in print was what?
My first job in print was with Metropolitan Home Magazine.
That's what I thought.
The original.
Yeah. Yeah.
I met Dorothy Kalins, who found me in Mississippi, down there when I was in a magazine graduate program. And I flew up and interviewed and moved in 2 weeks. Wow. Moved up on the Southern Crescent train with my blue trunk.
There was a magazine course?
Yeah, there still is. It's an incredible program at Ole Miss, yeah.
That is fascinating.
Magazines specifically. And it's funny. I mean, I ended up more on the editorial side, but I was excelling in the magazine design side of that program. So, coming back to home and being in this category of publishing, it kind of all made sense because, laying out magazines that are featuring interiors, there's a lot to that. It's not the same kind of design or editorializing that you would do in a more written magazine. Mm-hmm. The rooms and the pictures become much more a part of the design of the page. And so, I started at Metropolitan Home. I worked there through the 80s. I did a short stint. I had this sort of, I call it an early midlife crisis. I moved to New Orleans at the end of the 80s for 6 months. A friend came down and said, "You've got to leave here and get your life back together." And I moved to Dallas for 2 years.
Wait, what were you doing that you needed to leave there to get your life back together?
I wasn't doing anything.
Sounds amazing.
I call it an early midlife crisis.
Yeah.
I moved to the French Quarter. I lived in Burgundy, and I never left the French Quarter for 6 months. And then I moved to Dallas, and I took my portfolio, and I ended up like almost immediately getting tons of work for Horchow and Neiman's, Pier 1, Bombay.
And this is also like the heyday.
This was the heyday of these catalogs, where catalogs were really starting to become more magazine-like.
Mm-hmm.
So
right, like a precursor to Restoration Hardware's now Epic Tone.
Yeah, so they would hire me to come in and romance the product. So I would basically create room environments for the products that they were selling. And I did that for 2 years, and it was great. And then one day I woke up and I'm like, what am I doing here? I want to be back in publishing. So Met Home had been sold to Hachette while I was away, so I missed that kind of nasty period. Mm-hmm. And the editor-in-chief hired me to come back. I was very fortunate. And I came back and I worked at Met Home for a couple more years. And then I was hired to work at House and Garden under Dominique Browning, which was an incredible experience. I mean, Dominique is an extraordinary editor.
Yes.
And at that time, at least, Condé Nast really enabled editors to be creative, be original.
Well, think about it. We know from that moment on, I at least, like people my age and above, we know the names of all of those editors.
True.
You know, maybe you don't even know all the designers who were working at that moment, but we know those editors.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. But then I was hired away from there in 2000 to work in the early internet bubble. I used to think, gosh.
By whom?
By a guy named Scott Galloway, who's now at NYU. He's had a number of companies, but he's got an incredible following on a couple of podcasts called the Prof G podcast. And he's a brilliant guy. He had gone to Stanford with David Carey, who was a publisher I worked with. And anyway, I went to work for him on a website called Room 12. It was a travel website. It was the same time that Expedia was starting and Travelocity. We had 3 components. I oversaw the editorial guides. It lasted about a year, but it was a crazy, exciting year of reinventing ourselves like every 2 weeks.
And you said this was 2000?
This was 2001.
Okay, so just after the internet bubble had burst, so that's good.
This is
because
just
you would have been wiped out.
This was just as it was kind of happening, and it fell apart. It didn't last. It lasted 9 months.
Yeah, I got married in October of 2000. I remember flying home and reading the papers and being like, ah, with that whole industry.
Yeah, and then that folded. I was then hired by this entrepreneur in the Hamptons to do a prototype for a very niche, high-end shelter magazine for the Hamptons, all original content, called Cottages and
Gardens.
And we quickly spun out several other versions of the magazine, Palm Beach, Connecticut, to name the 2.
I mean, it's a wonderful franchise.
Still doing really well, I applaud what they're doing, and I think there's a place for geographically niche magazines. And it was another great experience. And in those 2 experiences, I learned something about myself. I learned that I loved startups, and I loved reinventing things. So I was, doing that work out in the Hamptons, and
which is what you're doing in the houses you renovate.
Exactly. But during my work in the Hamptons, I got the attention of Stephen Drucker, who's a dear friend and an amazing editor. And he said, "Come talk to me. You're doing something really interesting out here." And he had just been hired as editor-in-chief of House Beautiful.
Yeah.
So I went to meet with him, and I think we talked for 2 hours. I never had a conversation that I felt like, we were flowing back and forth in a way that I'd never flown in conversation with.
At least it didn't end up in bed. like, when you get along with somebody that well, you're either going to work with them or you're going to sleep with them.
True. And
you're turning pink. I apologize.
So I worked with Stephen for about 2 or 3 years, revamping House Beautiful, which, as most people know, is this really extraordinary shelter magazine with over 100-year history. I mean, that is no small feat for a magazine to exist that long and evolve and change and, all of that. And we did it. We turned it around. It was not doing well when we got there. We turned it around, and things went really well. And Stephen is brilliant, and Hearst decided to move him over to Town and Country, and I moved up to editor-in-chief. So I ended up as editor-in-chief of House Beautiful. I'm going to speed the story up a little bit.
No, it's so interesting.
And then, it was at the time where everybody was starting to figure out, trying to figure out how do we deal with digital, and then also how do we do publishing more effectively, because cost for publishing were going through the roof. Paper costs were going through the roof. Postage was going through the roof. And subscriptions were, challenged because people were having access to design through so many other venues.
Yeah.
So David Carey, who was at that time president of the magazine division at Hearst, asked me if I would try to implement something they had already started in the business side of publishing, and that was to create a group where there were 3 distinct brands, and some people only worked on one magazine, but then there was sort of back house, like copy editors, fact checkers, some of the designers that worked across multiple magazines. And, there were a lot of naysayers when we did that, saying, oh, Newell, you're going to blur all the magazines. But, while I was there, I felt it was really important to keep 3 editor-in-chiefs so that it was very defined, and they were extraordinary. Dara Caponegro was at Veranda at the time. Michael was at Elle Decor, and then I was at House Beautiful, but then I hired someone to replace me. And
I feel like it might have been you who told me this or somebody else when this was going on, saying that it gotten to a point where there was no oversight, and maybe 1 month both magazines had purple covers, and that was the blur that you identified as needing to distinguish.
It was some of that, but then there was also this.
I mean, that sounds trivial. The more substantial version of that. But.
But then there was this business opportunity, Alexa. Each of the 3 magazines had very few overlapping subscribers, believe it or not. So there was this opportunity from a business side with advertising to strategize things at the same time across all 3 magazines. Without doing the same thing, not doing the same content, but let's just say, very simplistically, maybe all 3 magazines do a kitchen issue the same month instead of staggering them. And, then you could kind of weld the weight of a huge audience, because at that time, audiences were starting to become really important, the scale.
Yeah.
Whereas our magazines used to be considered huge audiences with 850,000 people at House Beautiful, 500,000 at Elle Decor, and 480 at Veranda. You were starting to come up against, in ad sales, millions of viewers on the digital side and in the digital world. And even though they weren't able to monetize the digital world at that point, we found a way to kind of really garner the readership across all 3 magazines in ways that were very good for us in the business side.
And something that was going to happen inevitably, and the choice is, does it happen to me, or do I happen to it?
True. Yeah. And,
what a cool challenge.
By keeping the 3 editor-in-chiefs, it really kept the voice and the vision distinct. It enabled younger editors, and I had been in that position myself, where you work for one magazine for 5 years, and it's like, I'm kind of bored with this subject. I want to move to another magazine. This enabled young editors to sometimes get different experience with different editor-in-chiefs and different editorial platforms very quickly. So, as you were saying, editors of that time from my early days at Met Home, right now, there are a lot of the really good editors that are out there right now have come out of that Hearst design group. There's some really great.
That's awesome.
That are still working in print. And I think print still has a really interesting place in the world. It just really, there needs to be a lot of recalibration. Magazines don't have to be everything for everyone. They need to be a little more book-like. And they have got to be 100% original. It can't be algorithm driven. It can't be, driven by anything other than, and this is going to sound maybe silly, but informed, intuitive gut decisions of editors who.
Someone with a vision.
They're not
like when I look at Cabana, I'm gripped by what what they've decided to do. Did you ever read the book Griffin and Sabine?
No.
Okay, well, I'm going to send it to you. Anyway, it feels very interactive when I read that magazine. I mean, I love all kinds of magazines, but That one
Yeah,
was that was a very new and fresh magazine.
the big thing is that magazines need to charge what it costs to make them,
Mm-hmm.
and consumers need to pay that, and there needs to be no discounting of subscriptions, and a few other things on the business side. But to do that, magazines have to be original and have a strong vision. And so until all that can shake out, it's still gonna be kind of a shaky world. But I think there are opportunities, like when you see things like what Cabana has done, or you see, old girls like World of Interiors,
Yeah,
still
yeah.
with a really strong presence.
And that does feel like a story. Even when I look at those covers and I see the image, I feel like um, I've entered into a story. So it's interesting that you've got all of these varied elements to your career, but it listening to it superficially, it sounds like there's some major themes. You like starting things. You like seeing the whole vision and assembling it. And then you kind of like to let it fly.
Well, I love working with creative people, and I love the dynamic of a creative team. And I honestly, I will say this very sincerely, I love letting creative people do their thing.
But you're a
I,
creative
I
person.
don't like to micromanage people. So I really love that excitement. And, I miss that. I haven't been doing any of that in the last 2 years. I've just been sort of stepping back and taking a survey of the land. Also, wondering, how did I used to do everything that I did and have a life?
Well, don't we all wonder that?
I used to wonder it, but now.
No, I mean now. I'm
my
like,
days
hi, I have
so
children.
full.
I have children, and I can see them now.
I don't even know how y'all, those of you that have children, I'm in awe of you, because I don't know.
No, I mean, usually we just neglect them, apparently. So
But
you were a trustee of the New York School of Interior Design.
I
And I
am, as
think
you are.
you are a wonderful trustee because you have all of these different visions and experiences. Um, do you love what you're seeing in the decorating school landscape?
Yeah, well, I think you would agree with me that we both feel an education is incredibly important, but it doesn't stop with an education. I think you have to find a mentor or find an environment that allows you to continue to learn.
Yeah, I would rephrase that. It's not that it doesn't stop with education. It's that education doesn't stop.
That's true.
You just go from one school to another.
That's very true. That's true. So yeah, I really love my involvement with the school for that reason.
Yeah.
But also, I love the history of American decorating, of
Mm-hmm.
which you are royalty.
Well, I'm the child of royalty.
Well, no, you
I'm
are
the princess.
You're the princess. You're the princess.
Yes, exactly.
No, I find it fascinating. I did some stories at House Beautiful when I was editor in chief that
You
looked
did
at
you did the tree.
the genealogy tree, the genealogy.
Everybody talks about the tree.
Yeah, it was an obsession of mine for a long time, and it still is, because I find it really interesting. You can see continuity.
So that's the next book you need to write. Can you write that book?
Well, it's kind of been written.
No, but
Jennifer Bowles did a great.
sure, Jennifer Bowles and Stephen Drucker. But I mean, with the emphasis on the tree. Theirs is amazing. I love their book, and I could not have been more flattered to be in it. I think I had a heart attack and died, but I was revived. But tracing that influence, school of. Somebody's saying we need to see the tree. Will you post the tree, or is it easily findable online?
We made it into a poster. And it was folded up in the magazine. So I don't know if you go to the old digital versions, if you can see the tree. But it was a poster. I hope I have a couple copies somewhere.
I'm going to find it and I'm going to post it. was beautiful.
It was, you know, of course you start doing something like that and you realize, oh my gosh, I forgot so-and-so. There were a couple of really important branches that got missed on the tree, but
all the more
all in
reason
all,
to redo it.
all the more reason to redo it, yeah.
And also,
actually,
time has passed. Wasn't that like 2005 or
yeah,
6 or 7?
2006 or 7, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, somebody's saying, how do you incorporate modern and yesterday? But it says organic looms, so this might be a carpet question.
Well, I want to answer that question you asked first.
Okay.
Not in the context of rugs, because I think this is so important, and I know you're a classicist. You know, I'm a classicist.
I mean, for myself, for sure.
Yeah, I'm a classicist, but where that goes, or what comes from that for me, is proportion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It is all about proportion in everything, from a pattern to a space to to an element, a decorative element. It is all about proportion. And I have found over the years, if you get proportion right, you don't really have to do a whole lot more. If you don't get it right, you have to do a hell of a lot of decorating to fix it.
And that's why architecture is so important. So I had a Zoom call this morning with not a Zoom, just a call. And I, by accident, was in the tone because I'd forgotten what time. Like, it's a bad call when you can hear somebody sloshing around. But we were discussing about like the allocation of assets for this project. And I was like, do what you got to do. We got to have the house right and the proportions and the interior architecture, because I can do a phase 1 and the client can wait and we can do phase 2 or phase 3 or whatever. But yeah,
if it's
the
not
proportion,
right,
the scale of of the structure is totally the most important thing.
Yeah, and they're just sort of givens. There's math in that it's not just from the classical period, it's from the universe. I don't want to get too woo-woo with it, but
I'm looking for this quote that I can't find, that Francois Catrou, somebody posted, that he said, the late great Francois Catrou, recently late,
rest in peace,
that he said, and I couldn't find it, so I'm going to get it wrong, but he said, what is classicism if not that which is eternally modern? I was like, pretty good.
Oh. I'm going to have to find
And that's why you're Francois Catrou.
And that gives me chills, because that is so...
And it sounded like it was offhandedly delivered too, which I love. It was retrievable in that instant to him.
That is like a golden rule. That's a
nugget.
Yeah, golden nugget. It's true.
I had another question for you. Oh, well, somebody wants to know, and you have to include me in this. No, I'm going to ask that later. First, I'm going to ask you, all of these people are dying. All of these, in that tree of life that you did, the heads of families on your family tree, David Easton being recent, Francois Catrou, obviously Mario. It feels like a terrifically tumultuous leveling.
There's a passing of a generation of design. All the more reason to pay attention to it, because the tragedy of losing those traditions and that knowledge, is awful. I mean, we've already been through something similar with the AIDS crisis. I mean,
totally.
There was something incredible happening in California in the 70s between Michael Taylor and John Dickinson and Tony Duquette. Something really big.
And I would add like John Saladino, even though he was...
Yes, absolutely.
Like something,
but then AIDS wiped out a whole generation of the design community out there. And it really kind of, I'd say it set it back.
Yeah, halted the progress of distinctly American voice.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I have this other obsession with, California style, which is really, I don't like that expression exactly.
I know, it sounds terrible.
But it is something very distinctly American about decorating out there.
Sure.
They were far enough away from the East Coast that they were a little more liberated from European influences,
a totally
but still
original,
driven.
Yeah.
And they were pulling from the East in an interesting way, and in a more direct, not through import, like, you know, the India Trade Company import kind of influence on design, the Dutch West Indies influence. And then also because I feel like as design went across the United States, across the continent, something started happening with scale in decorating.
Manifest destiny. It got bigger vistas, greater.
You look at the work of like Michael Taylor, and he was playing with scale in this way that was really exciting. Scale in nature in this way that was really
rugged and rugged and gutsy. And so in this day and age, when something's jumbo, I want to gag and vomit. I'm like, ugh, you know, dealing with jumbo, people, it takes a genius to deal with jumbo. And he was that genius.
Yeah. And, you know, like you said, there's so much happening out there in design since that tree was done. You know, and I love looking at people that are practicing today and kind of making my own connections to people that came before them.
Like,
whether they were
the footnotes that you can see in their work.
Yeah.
You know, like now, I mean, the most obvious, like Miles Red to Nicholson to, you know.
Or Kelly Wearstler to Tony Duquette.
Oh, or Kelly Wearstler to a million people.
That one.
That I'm just, you know, many of whom I'm just discovering. It's the fear for me in losing all of these heroes is that you know, the historians will refer to a 3-generation reach back, that you could speak to somebody, very old person when you're really young, and they can tell you their firsthand experiences, and that's how you get the 3-generation reach back. But because we all depend so much upon online things that are pulled out of context, our understanding of those designs in their place will be lost. Which is why we need people like you who know everything.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, people like me, but also designers sort of in the middle like you. Like I saw a post from Harry Heisman last night. And he was, I think it must have been Mr. Hadley's birthday yesterday.
It was his 100th. It would have been his 100th birthday.
Yeah. And he posted something, and he was, you know, he mentioned going to him with, you know, a bunch of ideas to solve this particular problem in a design project. And Mr. Hadley turned to him and said, "Why don't you just paint it black?" And, you know,
and
it was like, oh my God, that's so simple and so brilliant, you know?
Yeah.
But there are people there, you know, there is a generation that we're all a part of that, like you said, it's important that we carry these things forward, carry the knowledge
but also that
forward.
We pin them in their time period.
Say what?
That we put them on that tree, that we put them in a line. So, because you understand so much more, you know, I understand your tinted room when I think of Dorothy Draper, and I think of, you know, and didn't you say you bought that armoire with a tinted element? And then there are those eternal motifs next to the ones that show progress.
Yeah. I know it's, you know, decorating or interior design, whichever way you want to call it, in America, I think is such an interesting topic because it is truly an American profession. I mean, there are roots of it elsewhere, but it really came more out of architecture or antique dealing in Europe.
Sure, it's like the brothers Adam and William Kent.
But the fact that it is so much of an American original concept, I love it. I love talking about it. I love exploring it. I love making new discoveries in it. And, you know, this whole Mexico thing, I feel like, you know, it's not the United States, but they are, you know, our enormous neighbor to the south. And I think there's got to be more dialogue, and there's this opportunity for so much enrichment in that dialogue that kind of circling back to Mexico, that is something I'm really obsessed with now.
So
In the context
bilingualism.
of the new world,
Yeah.
you know, the new world. And that sounds kind of old-fashioned to say that, but
No. But for you know, Americans, we aren't the, you know, like we've got lessons to learn. So you're saying that for those of us who need to broaden our horizons and learn more, it's for us, and you know.
well, as Americans, we have lessons to learn, but resources and you know, all of that.
What do you dream of doing in the next 5 years?
In the next 5 years, well, you know what, I have been looking and hoping for this kind of consulting opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, you
Because,
are a consultant right now. Yes.
you know, that is, and that is really kind of what I've been set up to do. You know, going back to my education and then all of my career experience has always been studying consumers, particularly in the world of home and design, and intuiting what they want before they know what they want, so to speak, or in sync with it at least.
So who does that make you work for? Who's your client? Or who are the many kinds of clients that you could have?
Well, you know, I think I love access to design. And, you know, most people are never going to be able to afford the help and the guidance of a professional. So I love making design more accessible to people, or at least making the design that's accessible better.
Yeah.
Through things like proportion.
Sure.
I mean, when I built this house, I mean, I was looking at standardized windows, and I was like, why are standardized windows this proportion? You know?
Is it truck size? I mean, is it doorway size?
Why can't Anderson or Marvin do a window collection based on classical proportions?
I mean, I think they should go to a David Adler book.
Oh yeah.
And just let rip.
Go wild, yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what? It's like one of those things that you don't have to
So
sell
would
it.
you work for an Anderson?
I need to pitch them.
No, but I mean, that's a great, and you know where all of the bodies are buried in terms of imagery. You know the references, what you're talking about, what the houses are, who did them, who the architects were, and you can connect those dots for them like in a heartbeat. So big companies like that. What about smaller companies that want to tap into all of the knowledge you have?
Well, I think there's just incredible opportunities now, you know. So you know, this first collection I've consulted on, you know, it's kind of my first step into that world, and I'm really excited about it. I think
I'm really excited.
There could be more opportunities in other areas, but that's, you know, I want to be doing more of that. I also want to be able to be a bit of a nomad.
Yeah.
I know I do not want to sit at a desk for another.
Well, your timing sucks because we're in the middle of a pandemic.
Well, I don't want to sit at a desk, so it's perfect timing.
Okay, you can get up and move to the sofa, but then again, you can get up and go back to the desk.
You know, it's so stimulating to be out in the world.
Yeah.
And I look back on my career, and that's the one negative thing about it, is that I feel like I spent so much time at a desk.
Yeah.
You know, when it's so important to be out in the world and be stimulated. And so, you know, you know, you asked me what I want to be doing in 5 years. I want to continue to do consulting work, and I want to be a nomad, spending the short but perfect, spectacular summers in the Catskills, and a longer part of the year in the sunny, warm environs of Merida in Mexico.
Awesome. Now, there's one last question that I've been putting off, and because I'm talking to you, you have to include me. But list of top 5 candidates for Biden White House. First of all, we know Victoria Hagan has worked for him, so I'm hoping that she gets to do the White House. But I'm available. Who else?
Well, you're both two great examples. You know what? It's funny. I haven't really thought about this, but let me think about it real quickly.
I will say that the person, Tam, who worked on the Trump White House, and she's very low key, does not, she's very under the radar in terms of self promotion.
Yeah.
She's a brilliant designer.
But has anybody seen anything that she was able to do there?
I haven't seen what she's done there, but I've seen her work. And let me tell you, mister, it is insane. It's like you would die. She is an incredible scholarly designer.
Well, maybe now as he leaves office, same as it was with the Obamas, they'll feel more comfortable letting that get out there in the public domain. What was done, who knows? I don't know.
I doubt it.
Hey, by the way, I'm really excited about being number 46 in your series.
Why?
Because Biden is number 46.
46. Oh my God. I'm sorry. I'm like, why? I don't understand. No.
My partner Doug looked at me and he goes,
piece of symmetry.
You know what that number is? And I said, no, what's that number? 46. And it's Biden. And I said, oh my gosh, this feels very lucky and fortuitous.
Yeah. I saw 11/11 on the TV screen at an airport yesterday, which was 11/11. So yesterday I felt like my plane would not crash, and it didn't.
11/11, those double 11s is supposedly
hypnotic stuff.
Yeah, very, very much so. But what I want to say too about Biden in the White House is, I think Michael Smith did a brilliant job at the White House.
Of course he did.
And it was brilliant because it was informed, but it was modern.
It reflected just how young and exciting that White House was, and how different it was. Obviously my father did it for George Herbert Walker Bush. That's a hard place to decorate.
Yeah, it's not easy.
I mean, the Oval Office, that's a tough room.
It's a tough room, and that book is great, by the way, that Peggy did with him, Margaret Russell. It was with so many other layers to it, to a process that's already complicated, that I'm just amazed that he got it done during 2 terms, because there was a lot to that. And I think hopefully whoever they hire to do the private quarters and other areas that start getting worked on during their term will bring a sense of, now, I don't want to say contemporary or modern, because I think those 2 words are loaded.
Well, and you have to remember that you're doing the private quarters of a person,
right,
aka your client.
Right.
You still have to honor their hopes and dreams for how they live.
Right, and what colors make them feel good, and what they want to be surrounded with. And Michael did an amazing job with that. Amazing job with it.
Yeah, totally.
Listen, if you or Victoria get it, perfect.
No, I'm not going to get it, but the question was name 5. So I was just letting you know that 2 names were going to have to come out of your mouth. Any other?
I don't know, but did you say Victoria's done work for them in the past?
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah, she has. She has. And I'm sure it was just like the most gorgeous thing ever.
That would make the most sense, because there's that understanding that already.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
That's so important in the designer-client relationship.
Totally.
I mean,
having a relationship. A relationship.
Yeah, well, and as you know, the more you work for a client, the better you know them, the better the work gets,
Totally. Yeah.
Not only like for them, but the more you're able to bring something to them that they wouldn't have expected.
Yeah, or where you know where to push or not.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, I think we have just come to the hour mark. Thank you so much, Newell.
Oh, Alexa, see you.
I am so excited about the line of windows you're going to do, because I'm going to need them. So Anderson, Marvin, Pella, whomever, those people need to reach out. And I'm really excited about your rugs. There's no question in my mind. I'm buying it immediately when it comes out.
Well, they're going to market. They'll be picked up by retailers, hopefully.
Oh, for sure.
And as soon as I know what those retailers are, I'm going to be posting it on my Instagram.
And as soon as the images are available for us to pepper the universe with, please share.
I'm excited. There are about 24 rugs in the collection, and there are some really good designs, because I also thought a lot about how designers use rugs. It wasn't just about interpreting this location, but it was interpreting this location in a way that made sense for consumers and designers, and how they put a room together, and the purpose of a rug, and what feels good below you, both in material and in design. So anyway, thank you for having me. It's great.
You're amazing. I miss you so much.
Likewise. I'll see you on Zoom, I think, in a week.
Yes, you will. Okay. I love you.
Bye-bye. Love you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.